Hello everyone. Welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night Podcast. Story 1. The Watcher of Westfield. Welcome back to the shadows of reality. I am your guide into the darkest archives of American history. Today, we begin our journey in one of the most peaceful towns in New Jersey, Westfield. This is the kind of place every middle-class family dreams of. Tree-lined streets, historic million-dollar homes, and a tight-knit community. But in 2014, at 657 Boulevard, the American dream morphed into a never-ending nightmare. Our story begins with Derek and Maria Broaddus. They had just closed on their dream home, a 1905 Dutch colonial revival bought for $1.35 million. Derek, then in his 40s, was at the peak of his career. He and his wife wanted nothing but the best for their 3 young children. But just 3 days after signing the papers, before the renovations had even truly begun, Derek went to the mailbox and found a thick white envelope addressed to the new owner. Inside was not a welcome to the neighborhood card. It was a handwritten note in heavy ink that made his blood run cold. The sender identified themselves only as the Watcher. The letter read, 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now. My father watched it in the 1920s, and my grandfather watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies behind the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. At first, Derek thought it was a sick joke from someone bitter about losing the bidding war. But as he read on, his breathing grew shallow. This stranger knew too much. He knew about the contractors' trucks. He knew they were tearing down old walls. And most terrifyingly, he mentioned the 3 children. He referred to them as young blood. He asked, "Have you filled the house with the young blood yet?" I asked the old owners to bring me young blood, and it looks like they listened. Fear gripped the Broaddus family. They immediately contacted the police. The detectives in Westfield were stunned by the sheer malice of the letter. No fingerprints, no DNA on the envelope, no postage stamp, meaning it had been hand-delivered to the mailbox by someone standing right on their porch. 2 weeks later, a second letter arrived. This time, the Watcher identified the children by name, in order of their ages, and even used nicknames that were only spoken within the family. He wrote, "I see you are working. I see you are painting. It's making the house happy again after being sad for so long. But be careful. Those workmen don't know what I know. Will the children be afraid to be in the basement? Or will they play in the attic? I will know when they go to sleep, and I will be watching and waiting for the time they are alone." Imagine standing in your own living room, looking out the window, and realizing that among the smiling neighbors, someone is using binoculars to track your children's every move. The Broaddus family began to suspect everyone. Was it the Langford family next door, who had lived there since the 1960s? Or the strange man who sat in a lawn chair for hours, staring directly at their house? The police interrogated the Langfords, specifically Michael Langford, a man perceived as eccentric. But there was no evidence. No polygraph test yielded a breakthrough. Meanwhile, the Broadduses spiraled into total paranoia. They installed a high-tech camera system and hired private investigators, including a former FBI profiler. But the Watcher always seemed one step ahead. He knew the camera blind spots, He knew exactly when Derek was alone in the house to send even more direct threats. "You have made 657 Boulevard afraid," the third letter stated. "It is beginning to turn on you."
Why have you changed it? The house needs its original form.
"You are driving away its spirits." 6 months passed, and the Broadduses never fully moved in. They were trapped in a financial and psychological abyss. They tried to sell the house, but news of the Watcher had spread like wildfire. No one wanted to buy a haunted house in the literal sense. They sued the previous owners for not disclosing that they had received a similar letter just before leaving, but the lawsuit was dismissed. The town of Westfield began to turn on them. Instead of sympathy, neighbors grew suspicious. Rumors circulated that the Broadduses were writing the letters themselves as a scam to back out of a buyer's remorse situation. The weight of public judgment and the fear of the anonymous stalker drove Maria into depression, while Derek never entered the house without a knife in his pocket. In 2017, 3 years after the first letter, they finally found a renter. But shortly after, another letter appeared, this time targeting the tenant directly. The Watcher wrote, "The house is still waiting for young blood. These new people are boring. I want what is mine." Finally, in 2019, the Broaddus family sold the house for $959,000, taking a loss of over $400,000, not including renovation and security costs. They left with a sense of relief, but also with permanent psychological scars. The identity of the Watcher remains a mystery to this day. Forensic testing on the envelopes eventually found female DNA, but it matched no one in the database of suspects. 657 Boulevard has new owners now. The letters have seemingly stopped, or perhaps the new owners have chosen silence as a means of survival. But when night falls in Westfield and the lights in the grand mansions dim, people still wonder, is the Watcher still out there? Is he sitting in a darkened room, peering through the curtains, smiling as he watches a new family settle in? The story of 657 Boulevard is a reminder that sometimes evil doesn't come from distant dimensions or desolate graveyards. It comes from right across the fence, from the polite neighbor, and from the secrets a century-old house can keep. Story 2. The Call of Skinwalker Ranch. The true story begins quietly in 1994, when Terry Sherman and his wife Gwen decided to buy the ranch to raise cattle. The Shermans were salt-of-the-earth people, tough, practical, and not prone to flights of fancy. But the moment they set foot on the property, they noticed something was wrong. The previous owners had installed massive deadbolts on both the inside and outside of every door, even the kitchen cabinets. Heavy iron chains were bolted to the windows. The previous owner's parting advice was brief and cryptic. No matter what you see, never, ever dig into the ground. The first terrifying event occurred on the very day they moved in. A gargantuan wolf, twice the size of a normal gray wolf, lumbered toward the Shermans across the field. Strangely, it seemed friendly, even allowing Terry to pet it. But in a heartbeat, the creature's demeanor shifted. It lunged, grabbing a calf through the fence and beginning to tear it apart. Terry, a seasoned marksman, drew his .357 Magnum and fired point blank at the wolf's ribs. The bullet struck the beast dead center, but the wolf didn't even flinch. It continued to chew on the calf. Terry fired 2 more rounds. The wolf finally let go of its prey and stood there, staring at him with eerie calm. Terry ran into the house, grabbed a high-powered rifle, and blasted the creature again. A chunk of flesh flew off the wolf, but not a single drop of blood fell. Showing no signs of pain, the wolf casually turned and walked into the thicket. When Terry tracked its prints in the mud, the tracks simply stopped dead after about 50 feet, as if the monster had evaporated into thin air. From that moment on, the Shermans' lives became a living hell. They began seeing sentient blue spheres of light hovering over their fields. These orbs seemed to possess intelligence. They toyed with the cattle and occasionally chased Terry's truck.
One night, his 3 loyal hunting dogs chased one of these orbs into the brush. Terry heard agonizing yelps, followed by a deafening, dead silence. The next morning, he found 3 scorched circles on the ground. Inside each circle was a pile of greasy ash, all that remained of his dogs. But what broke Terry and Gwen the most was the sheer brutality inflicted on their livestock. In less than 2 years, they lost 14 expensive cattle. These deaths defied all logic. Cows were found mutilated with surgical, laser-like precision. Eyeballs removed, organs missing without any ragged incisions, and absolutely no blood left in the carcass or on the surrounding soil. In one instance, a cow had a perfect circular hole carved into its reproductive organs while it was still alive and standing in broad daylight. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sound of aircraft, nothing. The Shermans began hearing disembodied voices whispering in the air in a language they didn't recognize. They felt eyes watching them from the attic, even though it was locked tight. Furniture moved on its own. Windows would fly open in the dead of winter. Eventually, Terry and Gwen resorted to sleeping together on the living room floor every night, rifles loaded, taking turns standing guard over their children. The events at Skinwalker Ranch caught the attention of Robert Bigelow, an aerospace mogul and paranormal enthusiast. In 1996, he bought the ranch and established the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS. He brought in top-tier investigators, hunters, and scientists, equipped with the most advanced surveillance technology of the time. What the scientists recorded was even more unsettling. They witnessed a portal open in the night sky, from which a large humanoid creature crawled out and disappeared into the darkness. They saw prehistoric, dinosaur-like creatures darting across infrared cameras. One of the lead scientists recounted that while he was trying to install a camera, a voice whispered directly into his ear, despite no one being within 100 yards, "We are watching you." The most bizarre discovery made by NIDS was that the ranch seemed to possess a precognitive intelligence. It knew when it was being watched. If they set up cameras facing north, the event would happen in the south. If they covered both directions, the equipment would suddenly malfunction, or the cables would be severed by an invisible force. One scientist described the phenomenon as a sentient presence, something that stayed one step ahead of humans and delighted and toyed with their perception of reality. According to local Navajo legend, this land is the home of the Skinwalker, dark shamans who performed forbidden rituals to gain the power to shapeshift into animals. The Navajo believe that digging in the soil, or even speaking the name of the Skinwalker, attracts their attention. They have avoided the area for centuries, viewing it as a cursed, thin place where the veil between our world and a darker dimension is dangerously frayed. The Shermans eventually left, but the psychological scars remained. Terry Sherman once said he didn't regret buying the ranch, but he regretted thinking that man could ever be the master of that land. Today, Skinwalker Ranch is guarded by private security forces.
Reports of inexplicable phenomena continue to leak out, from unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, to misshapen creatures prowling in the night. Skinwalker Ranch is more than just a ghost story. It is an unsolved puzzle of modern science. It reminds us that even in the heart of modern America, there are places where the rules of nature do not apply. Places where the shadows have shape and ancient whispers are still waiting to be heard. If you ever find yourself lost in the Uinta Basin and see a giant wolf smiling at you, my only advice is this: don't stop. Don't look back. And whatever you do, never, ever dig into the ground. Story 3. The Greenbrier Ghost. The story begins in Greenbrier County in 1896. Elva Zona Heister was a beautiful, vibrant young woman living with her mother, Mary Jane Heister. Zona's life changed forever when a stranger named Erasmus Trout Shue arrived in town to work as a blacksmith. Shue was a drifter with a rugged, charming exterior that quickly won Zona's heart. Despite the fierce opposition of her mother, who felt a visceral, dark intuition about the man, Zona married Shue after only a few weeks of courtship. By January 1897, tragedy struck. A neighbor boy, sent by Shue to check if Zona needed anything, entered the house only to find her lifeless body stretched out on the floor, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Shue arrived shortly after, wailing in apparent grief. But something was off. Before the local physician, Dr. George Knapp, could arrive, Shue had already moved the body, dressed his wife in a stiff, high-necked gown, and wrapped a thick, heavy scarf around her throat. Throughout the brief medical examination, Shue hovered over his wife's head, reacting violently whenever the doctor tried to inspect her neck. Out of sympathy for the grieving husband, Dr. Knapp recorded the cause of death as everlasting faint. However, Mary Jane Heister did not believe it for a second. She knew her daughter had been murdered. She took the sheet Shue had used to wrap Zona's neck and tried to wash it. When she dipped it into the water, she was horrified to see the water turn a deep, bloody red, and a foul, deathly odor filled the room. She knew then this was a sign. Mary Jane began to pray. For 4 consecutive nights, she knelt by her bed and pleaded for Zona to return and tell her the truth. On the 4th night, a sudden, bone-chilling cold filled the room. Zona appeared, not in her living beauty, but as a pale, sorrowful apparition. The spirit of Zona told her mother of the brief, violent marriage. She revealed that on that fateful night, Shue had flown into a rage because she hadn't prepared meat for dinner. He attacked her, and in his fury, used his powerful blacksmith hands to snap her neck. To prove her words, the ghost of Zona performed an act that left Mary Jane paralyzed with fear. The spirit slowly turned its head 180 degrees until it faced backward, showing that the neck vertebrae had been completely crushed. Mary Jane immediately went to the prosecuting attorney, John Alfred Preston. At first, he thought she was a mother blinded by grief and hallucination, but she spoke with such chilling detail, and her descriptions of Shue's odd behavior at the funeral, refusing to let anyone touch the neck and insisting on the scarf even in the casket, made Preston reconsider. He ordered an exhumation, a move that was extremely rare and scandalous for that era. The second autopsy took place right in the graveyard. When the scarf was finally removed, the horrific truth was exposed. Zona's neck was broken at the first and second vertebrae. Her windpipe was crushed, and deep, ink-black finger bruises were found on her decaying flesh. Everything the ghost had whispered to her mother was confirmed by medical science. The trial of Erasmus Trout Shue became a national sensation. Shue's lawyer tried to paint Mary Jane as a madwoman by cross-examining her about talking to ghosts, but she answered with a calm, unwavering clarity that silenced the courtroom. The jury, after weighing the mother's testimony against the forensic evidence from the grave, took only a few hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. Shue was sentenced to life in prison and died behind bars a few years later. The story of the Greenbrier ghost remains the only case in U.S.
legal history where a spirit's testimony indirectly led to the conviction of a murderer. Today, in West Virginia, a state historical marker stands to commemorate this case. It honors not just Zona Heaster, but the reminder that sometimes the truth is too heavy to stay buried 6 feet under. Justice may be delayed, but through the persistence of the living and the cries of the dead, the darkness must eventually give way to the light. If you ever find yourself driving through Greenbrier County on a foggy night, be careful as you look into the trees by the roadside. You might just see a young woman in a white scarf standing by her old home, whispering words of thanks that the truth was finally heard. Story 4. The Black-Eyed Children.
The story officially began on a summer night in 1996 in Abilene, Texas. Brian Bethel, a veteran reporter, was sitting in his parked car outside a movie theater, using the glow of the streetlights to finish some notes. The rhythmic pitter-patter of rain on the roof created a peaceful atmosphere, until there was a soft tap on his driver's side window. Brian rolled the window down just a few inches. Standing there were 2 boys, roughly 10 to 14 years old, wearing hoodies. Brian's first reaction wasn't fear, but confusion. Why were 2 children out at this hour, in the rain? The older boy spoke. His voice was eerily calm, devoid of the inflection you'd expect from a child in need. "Mister, we want to see the movies, but we forgot our money at home. Could you give us a ride to our house? We're just kids, you know." At that exact moment, a bolt of cold electricity shot down Brian's spine.
He felt a primal terror, the kind of fear our ancestors felt when facing a predator in a dark cave. His instincts were screaming, "Run!" Then he noticed something impossible. Despite the pouring rain, the boys' clothes appeared bone dry. Their skin was as pale as wax, and they refused to look him directly in the eye until he hesitated to answer. The boy spoke again, his voice now slightly more urgent and commanding. "Just let us in. We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. It will only take a minute." Brian summoned his courage and looked directly into the face of the boy closest to him. That was when he nearly fainted from horror. The boy's eyes had no whites, no irises, no pupils. They were just 2 solid, pitch-black pits, as dark as ink, like 2 black holes sucking the light out of the air. There wasn't a spark of life or emotion in those eyes. "Let us in," the boy growled, his voice now sounding like an echo from a limestone cavern, ancient and threatening. Brian immediately rolled up the window, slammed the car into gear, and floored it. Looking in his rearview mirror, he saw the 2 boys standing perfectly still under the streetlight before they vanished into the darkness faster than humanly possible. After Brian shared this story on an online forum, it sent shockwaves through the paranormal community. As it turned out, he wasn't alone. Hundreds of other reports began pouring in from across America, Portland, Chicago, and the remote hills of Appalachia. Another case occurred in rural Vermont in 2016. A woman named Sarah was home alone during a massive blizzard. There was a frantic knocking at her door.
Looking through the peephole, she saw 2 children standing in the snow without coats. Out of compassion, she reached for the lock to let them in from the cold. But the moment her hand touched the deadbolt, she froze. A wave of nausea and dizziness hit her like a wall.
She asked through the door.
"Where are your parents?" One child replied, "Our parents are coming. Just let us in to use the phone." Sarah looked out the side window and saw those ink-black eyes staring back at her. She felt as though her mind was being invaded, a psychic compulsion forcing her to unlock the door. She had to use every ounce of her willpower to back away, run into her bedroom, lock the door, and pray. The next morning, when the snow cleared, she found footprints surrounding her house. The most terrifying part? The prints led only to the door and stayed there for hours. There were no tracks leading back to the main road, as if they had appeared and vanished right on her doorstep. Neighbors later reported that during that night, every farm animal and pet in the area had been unnervingly silent. Not a single dog dared to bark. What are the black-eyed kids, BEKs? Psychologists suggest they might be a form of mass hallucination or an urban legend spread via the internet.
But for those who have stood face to face with them, that theory doesn't explain the paralyzing, soul-crushing dread they felt.
Some theories suggest they are aliens in human husks, or parasitic entities from another dimension that require human consent to enter our space. This explains why they always ask for permission. Let us in. Give us a ride. Like the demons of ancient folklore, they seemingly have no power unless we open the door. Whatever the truth may be, reports of BEKs continue to surface to this day. They never physically attack, but those who encounter them often report a streak of extreme bad luck, illness, or psychological collapse afterward. My advice to you is simple. If one night you hear a soft knocking and see children standing there with hoodies pulled low over their faces, whatever you do, do not look into their eyes. And most importantly, no matter how much they beg, never say the words, "Come in."
Because once that door is open, you aren't just letting them into your house. You are letting something that doesn't belong in this world into your life.
Story 5. The Tragedy at Cabin 28. The story takes us back to the night of April 11th, 1981, in the town of Ketty, a small resort community tucked deep within the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. Glenna Sue Sharp, a 36-year-old single mother, was living with her 5 children in Cabin 28. It was a cold spring night, the wind whistling through the ancient pines as the entire resort seemed to drift into a peaceful slumber. In the cabin that night, along with Sue, were her eldest son John, 15, John's best friend Dana Wingate, 17, and Sue's 3 younger children sleeping in a side bedroom. Her eldest daughter, Sheila, was spending the night at a neighbor's house just across the way. No one could have guessed that while they slept, a shadow of pure brutality was lurking right on their porch. The following morning, at 8 a.m., Sheila returned home. When she opened the door to the living room, a sight of absolute horror met her eyes, causing her to collapse instantly. The floors, walls, and even the ceiling were stained crimson with blood. Her mother, Sue, along with John and Dana, lay there bound with medical tape and electrical wire. They had been savagely attacked with knives and hammers. The injuries were so severe that police later described the scene as a cold-blooded execution. The first eerie and baffling detail. Sue's 3 youngest children, sleeping in the room next door, were completely unharmed. Their door remained closed, and they claimed they hadn't heard a single sound throughout the night, despite the evidence in the living room of a violent struggle. How does a massacre involving hammers and knives occur just feet away without anyone hearing a single scream? The second chilling detail. Sue's 12-year-old daughter, Tina Sharp, was missing. Police initially hoped she had escaped, but the truth was far darker.
It took 3 years, until 1984, for a hunter to discover fragments of her skull in a remote forest nearly 30 miles away from Cabin 28. The killer had not only murdered 3 people, he had kidnapped a child from the middle of a crime scene and vanished into the night. Police interrogated hundreds of people. 2 primary suspects emerged: Marty Smart, a neighbor living nearby, and his friend Bo Boubidet. Marty had a personal grudge against Sue and was known for a violent temper. Suspiciously, Marty reported a missing hammer shortly after the murders, a hammer that was later found and matched the victim's wounds. Marty even wrote a letter to his wife with a haunting admission: "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." However, due to severe investigative errors and a lack of determination from local law enforcement at the time, no one was ever charged. Key evidence was lost, interviews were cut short, and the case slowly went cold. Rumors of a cover-up circulated because Marty Smart allegedly had close ties to certain investigators. More than 40 years have passed. Cabin 28 was demolished in 2004, but the haunting memories have never faded. To this day, residents of Ketty still whisper about the sounds of quiet sobbing coming from the vacant lot on moonless nights. They wonder, who was the real killer? Why did he spare the young children but take Tina? Was there more than one monster in the cabin that night? And did the shadows themselves conspire to keep the secret? The Ketty case is more than a murder mystery. It is a symbol of justice's helplessness against pure evil. It reminds us that even in the places where we feel safest and most at peace, a monster in human skin could be watching from the trees, waiting for the lights to go out before stepping inside. If you ever travel through the Sierra Nevada, look into those somber pine forests and remember the Sharp family. The truth still lies somewhere beneath the fallen leaves, carried in the whispers of the wind, waiting for the day it is finally brought into the light. Story 6. The Man from Torred. The story takes us back to the summer of 1954 at Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan. Amidst the bustling crowd, a middle-aged foreign man, elegantly dressed in a business suit, approached the customs counter. He looked perfectly ordinary, spoke French as his primary language, but was also fluent in Japanese and several other tongues. Nothing about him raised suspicion until he presented his passport. The Japanese customs officials froze. The passport looked entirely authentic. It was filled with stamps from various countries he had visited. But the problem lay in the nation that issued it. The name of the country printed on the cover was Torred. No one had ever heard of such a place. Security officers immediately escorted the man to an interrogation room. When they told him his country did not exist, the man became visibly angry and bewildered. He insisted that Torred was a country located between France and Spain, and that it had existed for over 1,000 years. The officials handed him a world map and asked him to point out Torred. The man pointed to the area we know as the Principality of Andorra. But the moment he saw the name Andorra on the map, he collapsed in shock. He stammered that Andorra shouldn't be there. That was exactly where Torred was supposed to be.
and he couldn't understand why the map was so catastrophically wrong. He carried currency from several European countries, had bank checks from a bank no one recognized, and most importantly, possessed a driver's license issued by the government of Torred. The man explained that he was in Japan for a business trip, something he claimed to have done multiple times over the past 5 years. Sensing something profoundly bizarre and suspecting a sophisticated crime, the Japanese police decided to detain the man for further investigation.
They moved him to a nearby hotel for the night. To ensure he couldn't escape, 2 armed security guards stood watch directly outside his only door on a high-floor room. The room had no balcony and only one exit. The following morning, when the guards opened the door to take him for further questioning, they were paralyzed with disbelief. The room was completely empty. The man from Torred had vanished without a trace. The windows were still securely locked from the inside, and the guards swore that no one had entered or exited the room all night. Even more terrifying, when police checked the safe at the airport security office, where his confiscated passport and personal documents were stored, everything had mysteriously vanished as well. It was as if that man and the entire existence of the nation of Torred had never been present in this world at all. This story has become one of the greatest enigmas regarding interdimensional travel or parallel universes. One theory suggests that somehow this man accidentally stepped through a slip between 2 realities. In his reality, history took a different path, where a nation called Torred thrived instead of Andorra. And then, that same invisible rift pulled him back to his own world, erasing every trace of him from ours. Skeptics argue that this is merely an urban legend or a massive clerical misunderstanding. However, the reports and accounts from the Haneda security staff of 1954 remain a challenge to modern science. Who was the man from Torred? A genius con artist with technology ahead of his time? Or a lonely traveler lost between the folds of space and time? This story reminds us that the reality we cling to might be much more fragile than we think. Perhaps at this very moment, a rift is opening. And who knows, tomorrow you might wake up in a world where your own country never existed. Story 7. The Circleville Letters. The story began in 1976 in a small town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's face. Mary Gillespie, a local school bus driver, received an anonymous letter postmarked from within the town itself. The content was not a greeting, but a vicious accusation. The writer claimed that Mary was having an affair with the local school superintendent. The letter read, "Gillespie, I've been observing your house. I know you have children. This is no joke. Admit the truth and stop it. I am watching you." Mary chose to remain silent, hoping the harasser would soon give up. She was wrong. The letters began to arrive with increasing frequency, sent not only to her, but also to her husband, Ron Gillespie. The anonymous writer threatened that if Ron didn't stop his wife, his life would be in danger. One morning, Ron received a note that said, "Gillespie, if you don't do something, I'm going to blow your head off." The tension reached a breaking point in August 1977. Ron received a mysterious phone call. He furiously grabbed his revolver, told his daughter he was going to settle this once and for all, and rushed out of the house. Hours later, Ron was found dead in his truck, which had crashed into a tree. The police concluded it was an accident caused by driving under the influence. However, Ron's family insisted he never drank. Most chillingly, his gun had been fired once.
but the police never found the bullet at the scene. Ron's death did not stop the writer. He began sending letters to hundreds of other residents in the town, slandering their reputations and exposing the most intimate secrets of every family. All of Circleville lived in a state of paranoia. Who was watching them from the shadows? In 1983, Mary Gillespie was driving her bus when she saw a sign posted by the road filled with insults directed at her.
She stopped the bus to pull it up and discovered a deadly trap. A small caliber handgun hidden inside a wooden box, rigged to fire the moment the sign was moved. Fortunately, the trap jammed. Police traced the gun's serial number and found it belonged to Paul Freshour, Mary's brother-in-law. Paul was convicted of attempted murder and sent to prison. Everyone thought the nightmare was over, but it wasn't. While Paul was in solitary confinement with no access to pens, paper, or mail, the anonymous letters continued to arrive at Circleville doorsteps, postmarked from the nearby city of Columbus. Even Paul received a letter in prison, mocking him and claiming he would never get out. The writer seemed to be everywhere. He knew the police schedules, he knew what Paul was doing in his cell, and he knew who Mary was seeing. After Paul was released from prison in 1994, the letters continued for a short while longer, before suddenly stopping forever, leaving a town deeply scarred by distrust. Who was truly behind the Circleville letters? Was Paul Freshour a framed pawn? Or was there an entire group of people coordinating this twisted psychological game? The story of Circleville is a testament to how words and letters can become the most brutal of murder weapons. It reminds us that in a peaceful small town, the enemy is sometimes the person who smiles and greets you every morning. To this day, the identity of the Circleville writer remains an unsolved mystery. The town's secrets were either taken to his grave, or perhaps he is still out there somewhere, pen in hand, watching us from the darkness.
Story 8. Whispers of the Silver Bridge. The story begins on November 15th, 1966, in the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Two young couples were driving through a wildlife sanctuary, an area that housed an old World War II explosives manufacturing facility known as the TNT area. Suddenly, their headlights hit a creature standing near the factory gates. They described it as a man-shaped entity about 7 feet tall, but the most terrifying part was the massive wings folded against its back, and its eyes, large glowing red like hot coals, emitting a ghostly light. As they sped away at over 100 miles per hour, the creature spread its wings and glided right above their car without flapping, emitting a piercing screech like the sound of tearing metal. That was the beginning of 13 months of terror in Point Pleasant. Over 100 different people reported sightings of the creature, which the press later dubbed the Mothman. But the Mothman did not come alone. Its appearances were accompanied by inexplicable phenomena. Unidentified flying objects, UFOs, in the sky. Strange static interference on televisions and radios, and visits from the Men in Black, soulless-looking figures who interrogated witnesses about what they had seen. Many residents began having nightmares. They dreamed of bodies floating in the Ohio River. They dreamed of collapse and screams in the dark. One local woman recounted feeling an unnamed sense of dread and anxiety whenever those glowing red eyes followed her from behind the brush. People wondered, was the Mothman a monster coming to hunt them, or was it trying to warn them of something? The answer came on a cold evening December 15th, 1967. It was rush hour, and the Silver Bridge, connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio, was congested with Christmas shoppers. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic crack echoed through the air. A critical eye-bar chain snapped.
In less than 20 seconds, the entire massive steel structure collapsed into the icy waters of the Ohio River. 46 people lost their lives. Many bodies were never recovered. What is truly chilling is that immediately following the tragedy, all reports of the Mothman abruptly ceased. The creature vanished completely from Point Pleasant, as if its mission had been fulfilled. Survivors later claimed that in the moments the bridge fell, they saw a large, dark shadow perched atop the bridge towers, silently observing the scene before disappearing into the night. Was the Mothman a supernatural entity acting as a harbinger of death? In many cultures, the appearance of similar creatures often precedes great disasters. The Mothman did not cause the bridge to collapse. The subsequent investigation pointed to a technical flaw and metal fatigue. But its presence felt like a whisper from another dimension, reminding humanity of the fragility of fate. Today, Point Pleasant has erected a statue of the Mothman to commemorate these events. But for the town's elders, the fear remains. Every time they see a faint red light in the deep woods, or hear a strange whistle of wind through the steel beams of the new bridge, they wonder, will it come back? And if it does, what disaster will follow in its wake? Story 9. The Haunting of Summerwind Mansion. The story takes us to the shores of West Bay in Vilas County, Wisconsin. Here, hidden behind groves of ancient pines, stands the Summerwind Mansion, a stunning piece of architecture built in the early 20th century. Originally, it was a peaceful summer retreat, but everything changed when the Henshaw family moved in during the early 1970s. From their very first days, Arnold and Ginger Henshaw, along with their 6 children, realized something was profoundly wrong with the house. Renovators refused to set foot inside, claiming they felt a massive electrical charge and the presence of something malevolent. The Henshaws began seeing dark shadows flitting across the hallways, and the sound of whispers echoed from deep within the walls. One evening, while Arnold was inspecting a small crawl space at the back of a closet, he discovered a hidden human skeleton. However, when he returned with the police, the skeleton had vanished without a trace. From that moment on, a slow madness began to consume the household. The most bizarre phenomenon, and the trademark of Summerwind, was its spatial distortion. Ginger Henshaw reported that the rooms in the mansion seemed to have the ability to change size on their own. A room that was cavernous one moment would suddenly become cramped and suffocating. Windows would shift positions, and hallways you had just walked through might lead to a completely different part of the house just minutes later. The family's mental health collapsed rapidly. Arnold's personality darkened. He would stay up all night playing mournful melodies on an old piano until his fingertips bled. Ginger spiraled into a state of total panic after seeing an 18th century man manifest and vanish in the living room. After only 6 months, the Henshaws fled Summerwind, financially and spiritually broken. Arnold was later institutionalized, and their marriage fell apart. Years later, Ginger's father, Raymond Bober, attempted to buy the property to turn it into a restaurant. However, he too fell victim to the supernatural. Raymond claimed he had made contact with the spirit of a man named Jonathan Carver through a Ouija board. The spirit declared that the house was built over a spatial gateway and did not want to be disturbed.
The strangest detail occurred when Raymond tried to measure the house for renovations. He realized that the blueprints never matched reality. Every time he measured, the dimensions changed inexplicably. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting to some dark, unseen rhythm. In the late 1980s, Summerwind Mansion was struck by lightning and burned to the ground, leaving only the stone chimneys standing amidst the trees. Many believe that nature itself decided to erase this scar from the earth. However, curious visitors who seek out the ruins still report harrowing experiences. Their watches run backward, phone batteries drain instantly, and they feel the sensation of 1,000 eyes watching them from the void between the stone pillars. Summerwind is not just a haunted house. It is a puzzle of space-time. It reminds us that there are places in this world where the normal laws of physics are suspended, where the past, the present, and nightmares coexist in a single space. If you ever find yourself lost in the Wisconsin woods and see those old stone chimneys by the lake, be careful. Do not try to measure them. Do not look too deep. Because at Summerwind, reality is but a thin veil. And if you stare too long into the darkness will begin to close in on you. Story 10. The Last Flight of Frederick Valentich. The story takes place on the evening of October 21st, 1978, over the waters of the Bass Strait, Australia. Frederick Valentich, an enthusiastic 20-year-old pilot, was flying a Cessna 182L light aircraft on a training mission from Melbourne to King Island. The skies were clear and visibility was perfect. It seemed like a routine flight until 7:06 p.m. Valentich contacted Melbourne Air Traffic Control to ask about another aircraft flying at his same altitude. The response from the controller was chillingly simple. No known traffic in that area. But Valentich insisted he saw something. The following dialogue was recorded in the original radio logs and has since become legendary in aviation history. Valentich: "It's a large aircraft. It's hovering right on top of me. It has 4 bright green lights. It seems to be playing a game with me. It's passing over me at high speed." The controller asked Valentich to identify the aircraft. Valentich paused, then replied with a trembling voice, "It isn't an aircraft." Shortly after, Valentich reported that his engine was beginning to malfunction and was running roughly. His final words were, "It is hovering, and it isn't an aircraft." What followed those words was 17 seconds of bizarre noise. Audio experts described it as metallic scraping, a harsh, cold sound, as if the fuselage of the plane were being crushed by a massive force or being sucked into another environment. After those 17 seconds, there was nothing but static. Frederick Valentich and his Cessna vanished completely. The Australian military conducted a massive search operation across the sea and the ocean floor for weeks. Not a single oil slick, not one piece of debris. Absolutely no trace of a crash. A plane does not simply dissolve into thin air without leaving anything behind, unless it never hit the water in the first place. On the night of the disappearance, dozens of people in the surrounding areas also reported seeing strange green lights moving erratically across the sky. An amateur photographer even captured a photo of an unidentified object moving at high speed near the location where Valentich's plane was last seen. Many theories have been proposed. Some suggest Valentich became disoriented and flew upside down, mistaking his own lights reflecting off the water for a UFO. However, experienced pilots reject this, as the Cessna's fuel system doesn't allow for prolonged inverted flight without the engine stalling immediately. Others believe he faked his disappearance, though no evidence suggests he had any reason to abandon his life. The most controversial theory, and the one his family believes, is that Frederick Valentich was abducted. The phrase, "it isn't an aircraft," and the metallic scraping sounds evoke images of an encounter between civilizations.
Did the Cessna get pulled inside a massive craft? Is Valentich still alive somewhere in the cosmos, or in another dimension? To this day, the file on Frederick Valentich remains labeled unexplained. It is a cold reminder that the vast sky above still holds secrets that human technology cannot reach. As we end this season, we realize one thing: whether deep underground, in ancient houses, or high in the sky, this world always contains shadows where the light of logic cannot reach. Stay alert, stay curious, and never stop wondering about the mysteries of the unknown. Thank you for listening to this series. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear the next series.